Everything started like an ordinary day. The young man slowly opened his eyes. The only source of light in the room came from the digital clock opposite his bed, its red numbers glowing. The time, 13:13. He stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at the calendar hanging on the wall. The date was clearly visible. 31st of December, 2036, the last day of the year. He got out of bed and walked toward the calendar. He reached out and tore the page from its spot. A small crumpling sound echoed. He tossed the torn page into the trash. Beneath it, the new date appeared. January 1st, 2037. Then he headed to the bathroom. He splashed his face with cold water. The chill offered a brief sense of relief. He lifted his head and looked in the mirror. For a brief moment, a dark silhouette seemed to appear behind him. He spun around quickly, but no one was there. He blamed it on lack of sleep and moved to the kitchen and prepared a simple breakfast. His phone lit up with New Year's messages. A message from his friend was short and casual. "Don't be late tonight." Everything seemed normal. Yet an inexplicable unease lingered inside him. After breakfast, he walked into the living room. He picked up his coat to leave, gathered his keys, then approached the bookshelf. While reaching for his wallet, his eyes caught something. Among the books lay an old pair of red-framed reading glasses. He glanced at them for a moment. Then he turned and headed to the door, closing it behind him as he left the house. Outside, the city was alive. With the new year approaching, everyone seemed to be in a rush. Shops were crowded, the streets were decorated, car horns, chatter, and distant music blended together. He began walking toward the city center. As he stepped into the crowd, his phone rang. It was his friend. They spoke briefly, continued toward the cafe where they had planned to meet. Then, his shoelace came undone, slowed his pace. He bent down and tied it. When he stood up after securing the knot, something was wrong. Everyone around him had frozen. People who had been walking were now motionless. A child hovered in the air holding a balloon. A man was mid-step but completely still. A woman stared at her phone, frozen in place. Even the cars had stopped. The city had become utterly silent. Only his own breath could be heard. He took a few cautious steps, looked into people's faces. No one reacted. Time seemed to have stopped. His heart raced. Then a distant metallic scraping sound reached him. Before he could understand it, his shoelace came undone again, stumbled to the ground. Palms hit the hard pavement, slowly lifted his head, and everything had returned to normal. The crowd moved again. Cars passed. Sounds returned. No one looked at him, looked down. His shoelace was still undone. He was sure he had tied it moments ago. Bent down again, tied it once more, and stood up. Continued walking. But the unease inside him had deepened. When he arrived at the cafe, his friends were already there. They sat down at the table. Conversations started. Jokes were shared. Plans for the new year were discussed. Yet he found himself drifting in thought from time to time. A friend asked if he was all right. He smiled and brushed it off. At that moment, the TV in the cafe briefly glitched. The screen flickered with red static for a moment. No one noticed. Only he saw it. As the night progressed, the city became even more crowded. Night fell. Music grew louder. Squares filled with people. The New Year celebrations began. Midnight arrived. Everyone started the countdown, cheering, shouting, fireworks. But he kept watching the sky from within the crowd. A brief red streak appeared among the clouds. It lasted for only a moment. Then it vanished. The night ended. He returned home. Entered the living room and placed his keys on the table. As reached for his wallet to place it back on the bookshelf, he noticed something under the glasses, an old, thin, black, leather-bound book. It had strange symbols on the cover. There was no name. Picked it up, sat in the reading corner, put on the glasses, and opened the pages. Inside were strange symbols and writings, alongside dates, wars, fires, disasters. Every event had its outcome recorded, and all of it had actually happened in history. Some lines seemed erased or faded. He reached the last page, and his breath caught. In the middle of the page was a single date, December 30th, 2036. Beneath it was written, 1313, global annihilation after a meteor strikes the Pacific Ocean, and in smaller letters, after the first siren, it will be too late. He glanced at the clock. It was past 1500. Looked back at the book. Read it again and again. Tried to make sense of it, but his eyes grew heavy. He leaned back in the chair and fell asleep without realizing it. When he opened his eyes, he was in his bed, shot upright, and looked at the digital clock. 1313, the date was the same. 30 December 2036, terrified. He leapt from the bed, ran into the living room, looked at the bookshelf. The book was gone. Only the red glasses remained, just as he began to convince himself it had been a dream. The city sirens started wailing, long, mechanical, piercing. The ground shook violently. Windows rattled. Screams rose from outside. He ran to the roof. Opened the door. The sky was completely red. On the horizon, a massive wave was rising. A gigantic tsunami advanced toward the city. In the distant sky, a fiery streak appeared. A meteor. Without realizing it, he held the red glasses in his hand, slowly put them on, and in the wave, saw his own silhouette. The scene went black. The last thing heard was the digital clock. 1313.